For everyone who's listening, my name is Gabriel Menotti. I am currently associate professor here at Queen's University and chair of the program, the grad program in Screen Cultures and Curatorial Studies. I am a researcher, I guess, and I work as a curator, I guess. Uh, Curating is perhaps my main way of doing stuff, which basically means trying to produce connections between different elements, people, contexts, situations, technologies, works, and seeing what come out of it. And it's also my main research method in a way, or maybe a central component in my research projects. I normally try to understand media circuits or artworks or cultural artifacts by the means of curation. And I think I'm here because I have done work before that involve exhibition platforms that are media based and that kind of more specifically, I had a project a couple of years ago that tried to explore immersive worlds as exhibition spaces. So it's super nice to be here and be able to share a little bit of what happened and learn from all of you.
Amazing. Nice to see you all. And my name is Karam Malitsky Sanchez. I have been working in the digital media space since the early 90s and running online communities. Some of them were PHP based forums, and then others were in World of Warcraft. And I started Indie Game Reviewer.com in 2007 to track the new underground artistic format of telling personal, intimate stories through digital media. And we've been analyzing, critiquing, and supporting independent game developers since then. And also later in 2015, I started the 5Rs Festival of international virtual and augmented reality stories because I wanted to ensure that we could have truly global representation in the XR space. And I'm very proud to say that every year we get hundreds of unsolicited submissions from around the planet and a really amazing insight into what's going on in different countries and territories. And it's a personal passion of mine and a goal to keep culture heterogeneous and alive in the technology sphere. And I started the VRTO conference in 2016 for the same reason. There was some already well entrenched tech conferences, but I wanted to make sure that independents were represented and that alternative streams could be supported that were not necessarily always corporate minded or concerned with the bottom line so much, and to ensure that the boundaries of what the medium could express continued to be wobbly. So and I guess the final thing I'll add is that in the pandemic, we had to take those events online. And so we went into a WebXR solution for both, using white label Mozilla Hubs for the VRTO conference, which we ran for an entire month, that in 2020. And then for 5Rs, we used the open source Janus XR solution, and ended up over the course of 5 years building a 8K spherical stereoscopic spatial audio WebXR multi-user space. And that's been an interesting thing to have both of those running concurrently. So I'll pause there.
Hi, everyone. I've had the pleasure of connecting with all of you before, so I'll try to keep this short and pithy. For those of you who are watching the recording, my name is Liam Carey. I'm the founding artistic director of Single Thread Theater Company. We've been doing immersive experiences, creating them as artists since 2003. However, we've been producing the PXR conference, which is a conference on live performance and in XR technology since 2020. And we just finished the 5th edition last week. So that's pretty fantastic. in terms of my own engagement, I would say, I mean, I'm a bit of a curator. I help curating the conference. I'm also an artist. I'm an immersive theater artist. I've been doing that for 20 years or so. I've had the pleasure of doing that IRL in Canada, but also all over the world. And that's been pretty cool. And that's actually what led me to the XR space. Colleagues and I at Single Thread started looking at game design and XR design in about, I don't even know, when was that? Like maybe 2012. We're like, you know what? There's got to be a better way of doing this. There's got to be other fields that are trying to create immersive experiences. And I bet those fields have a lot more money than immersive theater in Canada. So what are they doing? And we started like finding the used copies of game design textbooks, and like we started peeking into that world, and we started folding those concepts and those ways of thinking into our own IRL experiences. So when XR became in reach, we decided it's time for a conference on this because we were excited about the possibilities within for people like us who like telling stories through the experience of space in a way that's a bit more holistic than conventional theater practice. Yeah, so I would say I'm a curator. I would say a big thrust of the PXR conference is to contribute to this creation of community that everyone on this call I know is a big believer of. We think of the PXR conference as, forgive the metaphor, but a bit of a campfire that we're trying to gather people around to talk and network and sort of strengthen the other campfires and situate Canadian theater artists and live performers as part of this incredible XR ecosystem that's unfolding. And then as an artist, through Single Thread, I've been one of the artistic leads on the Collider process. Basically, it's an R&D process that we have as artists in order to figure out, okay, how does this work? How do we bring live performance into this tool? Not only curating a community and trying to run a conference and invite everyone to the table, but also just getting granular into our own explorations. And we've done 3 iterations of that, and we're preparing to do a 4th, which fuels me artistically. I like being a curator and a producer, and I like building the community, but I just can't get away from wanting to get my hands in the kitchen and just figure out how this all works. So that's how I engage with this idea of virtual space, and it's a pleasure to be here.
So just to get an introduction of what we're even talking about, this is a WebXR space. This is a web page, and this is our Halloween night that we did. But basically, you can zoom into these different waypoints and then walk around using a Ready Player Me avatar. And when you click on a movie, then you will see a CSS card that pops up with its information. And then you can hit play. And if you have a VR headset, it will be stereoscopic if it is stereoscopic. And you can see that the movie starts to play right away. Now, I am also in Zoom and I have a couple of screens open, but it loads basically instantly and there's no buffer time. This one happens to have a lot of credits. And so this is going to stream in 8K if it's available. And we also have a little drop down at the end. So if you have lower bandwidth, you can do that as well. And you can see that the text chat is still available. And then you can just jump out. And one more thing I'll show here is that we have been able to do dome projection stuff. And this is great because the half dome stuff just really feels good in the correct form factor. So this is a piece by Marek Slipik from Germany. And something to note here is that when this gets going, the light from the screen is hitting the floor. Just that creates a really subtle sense of immersion. So you might not see it right away, but that kind of nuance is great. And putting some basic normal maps on the floor to catch that light bouncing off of the environment is really cool too. And we did a IMAX piece as well, where we had to basically research like what is the exact offset of the seats to the screen, which happens to be 260 degrees, I think. And then there's an entire multi-speaker setup that will align with the original theaters. So that's the 5 Rs. And then I'll very quickly show you the other one, which is you had mentioned that Gabrielle is working on museums. So this is the Canadian Hispanic Latin American Virtual Museum. And there's this whole onboarding thing at the beginning for accessibility that shows the accessibility affordances that we have implemented, so you don't have to guess about which they are. It's also trilingual, so you can instantly change it to Spanish and French. And rather than doing that dynamically, we hard coded that because all of the translations had to be vetted properly. And then we have this waypoint implementation and an explanation of how those portals work. And everything on this screen has a one-to-one affordance. So if there's something you can do, it has an icon to represent it. And then you can also click this question mark and the screen dims, and then you can see precisely what each one of these icons does. And the reason for that is because not everybody knows how to use WASD or other game-based affordances, and they might be on a tablet and they might be on a phone, and we wanted to ensure that nobody was really left behind. Finally, we'll just say that I'll just mute this for now, but these models had to be massively compressed from about 20 million polys, because these are complex heritage ceremonial costumes, down to about 10,000 polys, and all of the UV maps and textures and everything had to be scaled down, but done by hand so that they could look beautiful and do service to the content. And then we have a bunch of mini documentaries that play diegetically in the world. So that's just a quick idea of what we're even talking about here. The organization got a grant from the Canadian government for digital museums and virtual museums. And this was specifically the MAPS project in Canada, which looks at capturing cultural archives through emerging digital media forms. And there's a pushback that can happen because they say that, VR is not accessible because of socioeconomic barriers. And so we had to make a case that said, look, I've been using this 5Rs, and this is why I showed you these two in sequence, because what we did with 5Rs uses an open source. It doesn't have an ongoing carrying cost, or the carrying cost is negligible, which is to store assets in Amazon Web Services. And this organization said, could we use the 5Rs framework for what we're doing? And I said, oh, I think we could. And I think that what's best about it is that it'll cost you pennies a month to keep it alive. So I advised against using a lot of 360 video because that is expensive. And if you don't have a paywall and you don't have a ticketing system and you don't have moderation, then there's all sorts of other problems, COPPA concerns, children walking around with who knows who in there. And so you have to turn off VoIP, you have to turn off text chat. And I said, I would lean away from the spherical content because it's like turning on a faucet and running it all day, and you can't afford that. So it had to be beautiful and ready to go with just in situ assets that could sit there and not take up any space or bandwidth. It had to be multilingual. It had to be accessible across all devices, which meant that it was responsive and dynamic, and anybody could tap it, and that the VR had to have the lowest possible barrier to entry. Just like turn it on, it works. And so the VR is not complicated. It basically just lets you stand and look around and see things at scale. And if you know how to glide, you can glide, but it doesn't do more than that. So all the text and everything is in the desktop mode. And that's just the point, is that it's one thing to make stuff, but it's another thing to say who's really going to be able to see this stuff. And I would say 90% of the research and development on that project was around accessibility. And I mean in the truest sense of the word, not just like, oh, there's this or that, but we had to reflow 4,000 lines of hard code per site just to make sure that a screen reader saw the right thing at the right time in the right order and didn't have to burn through all the information before you got to the go button. And that can't be discovered without actually working with people who have low vision or who have no vision or who use other input affordances to be able to navigate. So yeah, that's a sense of kind of like what I mean in terms of working truly with immersive access.
So yeah, it was great to hear more about what you're doing, Karen, especially not only especially, but also from the technical side. This is the website of Museum Without Walls. Every time you refresh it, you have a different presentation of kind of textual, visual, audiovisual, and aura material, as you can see. And that's the main space for this project that was originally meant to be an actual exhibition in a physical museum in Brazil. I mean, and it was thought of, as I said, originally this was meant to be an exhibition in an actual museum in Brazil, and it responded to this revamping or this renovation of the museum building. And I wanted to explore how media in general also played the role of museums, and in a way, how the institution of the museum could expand through other media, including VR. Originally, the exhibition was meant to gather lots of documents of alternative museum projects, and some of them would be VR museums to be experienced live by the visitors. This didn't happen because of COVID, so all the project moved online. The main bulk of the exhibition is this website with all this documentation from different museum projects that you can see up here is brought together. Some of them are like indigenous-oriented curatorial projects. Others are kind of VR recreation of traditional video art pieces. We also have a specific community open-air museum that was created as a way to resist evictions that were being done in Rio de Janeiro because of the construction work for the Olympics in 2016. So very different projects with different configurations, but also different ideas of what a museum could be. But as we moved the project online, I realized that we lost what was central for us, which is the museum as a social space where people would gather and get in contact with these things and get also in contact with each other. So we supplemented this more traditional passive exhibition experience with a number of commissions that were meant to involve different community and artist groups in also occupying the virtual museum that we wanted to represent and recreate online. And I guess that for all of these initiatives, we also had accessibility very much in mind, because when we had the original event in the museum, well, people would come, they would be able to use headsets that we would be providing them. So that's all fine and good to some extent. But I don't believe many people in Brazil at the time had headsets, VR headsets in their home, for example. So we tried to be as accessible as possible in many different ways. And very quickly, just to give you a sense of what you did, the simpler project, but at the same time, what I think it's the most powerful one in terms of accessibility was a podcast that consisted of a series of audio guides for fictional exhibitions in this museum. So these small audio clips describe the museum occupied by other institutional actors. And that was particularly interesting because we're talking about the official state museum. So we were playing with representation and power while we're doing that. And we also responding to how podcasts became so ubiquitous in the pandemic. We also produced a number of digital replicas of some works in the museum collection, and made through 3D scanning. We uploaded all of them as open source, freely downloadable Creative Commons files to Sketchfab, so people could download these assets and use, for example, in their classes, use in their own virtual constructions and environments. And this is still online because Sketchfab is still working. It might stop working sometime soon now that Epic Games is kind of revamping all their marketplaces. But on top of that, again, also thinking about different forms of accessibility, we produced a number of augmented reality filters with, again, scaled down versions of these models so that people could use and could access these 3D models more easily and also recontextualize them in their own spaces. And we had a lot of classrooms of high school students using these augmented reality filters, which were loaded on Instagram, to do exercises about these elements in the collection of the museum. Sometimes, actually, since a lot of these pieces were in the collection and not on show, it was one of the only ways for these students to get in touch with the work. I have documentation of this in catalog, but not on the website. And finally, we also had a sort of VR residency where we commissioned groups, most of them groups and artists, most of them who never worked before with digital media or with immersive media, to occupy a replica of the museum that was also hosted on Mozilla Hubs, and initially just produce exhibitions for it. And so they did, but as you can see from these snapshots, maybe the only one that kept the museum building intact was Renato Pera, who transformed it in a kind of haunted house full of zombies and a giant bleeding head and a compilation of zombie movies as well. All the other groups and artists, they transformed the museums in completely different things. We liked to, and we intended to use Mozilla Hubs, which became super popular during the pandemic because, as Karen mentioned, it's very accessible in terms of the equipment you need for it. Also very accessible in terms of how you can create and change environments that run on it. Like, as I said, we had this residency for perhaps 5 weeks, and many of these people never worked with immersive spaces before or 3D modeling, and they were able to work together, exchange information, and recreate the museum in many different ways. And I guess that the problem right now is that 2 of these projects that I showed you, we have kind of lost access to them because Mozilla Hubs, their actual server, their central server as a platform has been discontinued, just like the Spark AR platform that Instagram provided users to create filters, well, with create and publish filters to Instagram and the Meta ecosystem without any kind of hurdle, which show how sometimes accessibility, when you rely on these platforms, you're always kind of a hostage to them. And we already knew that to some extent, especially when we were using kind of Instagram as a way to get high school students involved in making and appropriating new cultural artifacts. Like, it's very controversial from political and even a consumer perspective, really. Like, we are kind of onboarding these students and making them use Instagram much more than they need to. We are kind of including Instagram as a tool for teachers and for the classroom. And in a way, this makes also the classroom rely on a private platform for it to work. So there are many problems there, but at the same time, we had very few resources, a very limited time, and it felt like a good way to kind of fast prototype different forms in which our relationship to cultural heritage could be performed through these new technologies. And yes, I think that
so many notes on that.
I'm so happy to be part of this discussion. There's so much that's being said right now. I hope I can watch a recording of this because I didn't have time to get all the notes down, but thank you very much. On the subject of accessibility, I would say, if I may contextualize the work that we do in reference to what has already been shared in the conversation, I would say I've had the pleasure of talking to everyone on this call about accessibility. Karim was very kind to talk to my colleagues and I a couple of years ago about accessibility and platforms and technology, and that conversation was very helpful. Thanks again. I would say that my own work and that of my organization, we're unapologetically coming at it from where we came from, I would say. We are immersive theater artists, so we're coming at it from an immersive design environment standpoint. And because theater is so temporal, as we all know, it's about how do we get everyone together for these 3 days? Like that is the lens at which we're looking at. So that has been most of the time that we've spent on actually constructing our worlds. This is a bit of a slide deck that we made a couple of years ago. The images contained within are from AltSpace VR, which was our home for the first 3 years. It is no longer with us, and we are very sad about it. And it just shows, as the caption shows, it shows that every year we've tried to create the most compelling experience possible. Every year we've asked ourselves, okay, but we're not in a convention hall. We're in VR. So what does that mean, and how can we fully embrace it? Asking those types of questions as immersive theater artists has let us get instead, okay, but why? But why? And the evolution of the spaces that we've designed for the conference has been us trying to figure out how to fully embrace that art form. How do you have meetings in VR in the most compelling way? How do you have a conference for live performance artists, most of whom have very little experience in XR, in a most compelling way? And then because we just can't help ourselves, how do you instill a theme or a narrative in the overarching conference that amplifies all the individual presentations that are happening? And how far can you meld an overarching narrative, an overarching universe, and still maintain the integrity of the information being presented? So here are some of the we were very excited about bees in 2022 because bees are necessary for life on the planet. Also, we fell in love with this idea of those of us who are on the edge of XR in any field are exploring, and we believe anyway that XR will meet its most potential when we act communally and act together and act in sharing and build community. And we thought, I mean, it's a bit on the nose, but making all the attendees bees would be a way to sort of hammer that home. So we made a giant beehive. You could ride around on bees. And that was last year. In terms of the year before, it was a circus. In that we were trying to lean in thematically with the idea of gathering a circus, an event, a celebration. Coming out of COVID, we were all a bit sad, and we're like, we need to do something fun. Circuses are fun. Everyone likes going to the circus, so let's get everyone together. And the reason why I included this slide was, that was we were looking at it theatrically, so we wanted to provide a variety of virtual spaces, if you were. There was the giant big top, which you see in the top left, but we also wanted to have like intimate little breakout spaces to encourage sort of organic connections. Something that we learned very early on in PXR was people like the presentations, but what people really want, what they remember, are the hallway conversations. Like what people tell us about is like, my favorite part of the conference is when I was moving my avatar down a virtual hallway and I ran into someone I haven't seen in 5 years in real life, and we stopped and talked, and we're late for the presentation, talking this virtual hallway before going on. And that was so instrumental during COVID. But since then, we've tried to think of the conference holistically. It's not just about the delivering of the presentations, although they are the most important thing, but how do we give a sense of place, a place to this event? Because we believe as theater artists that sense of place is what builds community and what sort of grounds the reality of it. Theater artists, as many academics at Queen's University study, that sense of liveness. How do we capture liveness? And as curators of this conference, something we often run into curatorially is that there's so much wonderful community building happening in XR, but that there seems to be sort of an internal debate, like, what is liveness? Define it. Is it tangible? And how does that come into XR? And we have some definite ideas, but the verdict still out. So anyway, that's a bit about space. Really quickly, because I feel like I'm definitely not the museum guy, but that's okay. I have something to contribute. Just really quickly, branding the streams, coming up with a way to sort of dissect the content that we're offering into a set of streams to make it easy for people to know what they're getting into. We were very excited about PXR Experience, which we brought in a couple of years ago, and not just as a place for people to show their live XR works, although that's very exciting, but also a place for primarily Canadian creators who have live XR experiences. Give them somewhere to go. So if you build a thing, there's another opportunity to get paid to present the thing, and we wanted to do that. Not because we thought there was going to be a huge market for that, but again, thinking communally, thinking of the ecosystem and saying like, well, people, if they build a thing, they should get paid properly to present it. So why don't we build a place for people to do that? And that's why we built the PXR experience. Oh, look, there's this handsome devil right here. This was delivered. I totally planned this. Giving our future note, and it was fantastic, by the way. And there's a little bit about platforms, et cetera, et cetera. But again, on the accessibility note, just really quickly, I'm getting away from digital spaces. However, I think it is only appropriate to mention that there's two outreach programs that come with the conference. One is the IBPOC Fellowship, where we provide mentoring, hardware, and honorariums to members of those equity communities to do work in XR. We've had a lot of theater people, we've had some filmmakers, we've had some fashion designers and some architects, and that program is ongoing in terms of accessibility. And then, of course, the XArtist Link Up, which is basically almost a game jam, but over a week, where students from across disciplines, we've had technologists, XR programmers, game designers, acting students, architectural students, all meet up for a week, connect with their fellows from across the country and make a thing, and then we present it at the end of the conference. So yeah, that's really exciting. So that's a little bit about that. I'm trying to keep on, there's so much to say, but if I may move over to the Collider project just really quickly. I know we have so much to talk about. This is the report from Collider 2.0. As I mentioned, we're working on 3.0 now. I won't go too into detail, but again, we're definitely coming from our experience as immersive theater creators. So yes, just an opportunity to take time, months at a time, which to be frank, in the theater community, if you have months to do anything, you're way ahead of the game. Most professional theater rehearsal processes or script writing processes are measured in weeks, not months. So having time to really get granular about all kinds of things, not only the construction of narrative within a space, but also, and sorry, I can send this to you, but just what is the avatar? Is it virtual puppetry? Is it something else? What does that embodiment mean? If you're an actor using this technology, what are the skills and how do they intersect with existing training that's happening in the theater sector, and what additional training might be required? Design, there's a bunch of things in here, but just again, getting really granular about how the tools and how these worlds can be used by live performers. And another thing that I'll mention that's really important to us is just need for resources and time is what skills do creatives have to offer the XR space? I mean, the skills, I would argue, to speak frankly, the skills of filmmakers and technologists and programmers to XR, that's obvious. But if you've been a dancer, a circus performer, a storyteller, a dialogue writer, I believe there's something that you can offer this XR medium as it blossoms. But what is it, and how do we situate those creatives into the conversation? How do and that's something that we're very interested in. I mean, it's not technically a virtual space, but I feel like where particularly Canadian-born creators are in terms of this explosion, I think is something that we're very interested in, and something that we think a lot about. So I hope that wasn't too meandering. It's a lot to encapsulate, and I'll pass it back to our gracious host.
Curating for different spaces. I think that as a curator, I'm very open generally, and I try to respond to situations and to sites as honestly as I can. I'm not that interested in curating. I do that, but I'm not that interested in curating for wide cube regular galleries. And one of the inspirations behind the original Museum Without Walls project, back when it was going to happen in a museum, was the fact that after the renovation that I was describing, the galleries of the museum would be open to the outside of the building, because it was kind of a historical building and all the windows had been closed. It was turned into this very traditional neutral space, and the renovation was basically tearing everything down and making the building more of itself. So I think these situations are very interesting. And in a sense, when I'm trying to curate, I'm trying to create these connections, conversations, and cross-contaminations, not only in between the works presented, but also the works and the context, the works and the audience, the audience amongst themselves, the audience in the space, etc. So in a sense, I'm always approaching spaces where online media spaces or physical ones with this same attitude, I guess. So I'm taking the space for what it is, and I'm taking it as an active contributor to the experience of everything, of the work, of the audience, etc., etc. I guess that perhaps another thing, the main difference, if we think about, let's say, a continuum of exhibition spaces, some that are more standardized and other that are wilder, is, well, exactly that. Some spaces are kind of ready. They are waiting for you. Even the White Cube galleries, each of them is an individual space. It's difficult to get to the space, or it's located in a particular location in the city, for example, in a particular neighborhood. So it has a number of particularities. That's what I mean to say. But it feels that you are presenting your work in a space that's conduces you to do so in certain way that is more convenient, it's more comfortable. Whereas, okay, let's organize an exhibition, I don't know, in WhatsApp. Let's organize an exhibition inside a wardrobe, a cupboard. Let's organize an exhibition in a moving train. What exactly is that? I mean, it's just because the rules have not been invented yet, but maybe in a couple months, going back to the glitch aesthetics discussion, for example, maybe in a couple months, exhibitions in moving trains become a fad and it becomes a standard, and the rules to making it will be public domain and everyone will know how to do it in a particular way. So I guess that in any of these situations, it's always good to try to deprogram yourself. So when you're working in a wild medium, in a wild kind of exhibition space, you are forced to do this. You're kind of forced to reinvent your own practice. And when you're doing it in a White Cube gallery, maybe you need to always attempt to do so. So in that sense, I feel it's harder to be interesting, perhaps for a curatorial and almost masochistic side, to do a project in a traditional exhibition space than in a wild one. And also that's true for online spaces as well. Like these days you have, for example, New Art City, which is kind of a WebXR, web immersive space that is made for exhibitions, which is on particular affordances and tools, and that's kind of easy to use in a way. That
What's the main differences
The
when you
location
do
stuff?
yeah, the physicals and
I mean, it's crazy because we really do run terrestrial events. As much as we want to pretend that we're not, we're an event company and we have to buy insurance and we have to predict how many people might attend this thing and how will they get to this place? Can they take a bike or a subway? Where will they eat? Do they have wheelchair access? How many bathrooms are there? But the thing is, when you did come to 5 hours this year, it was technically a white box, but it had this sort of punk aesthetic and it was in a back alley and that was intentional. The graffiti on the walls around it were part of the energizing nature of it. And I always talk about, like, why would somebody be okay, so if you can sit at home and put your XR headset on and people say, well, just decouple from reality, I have to ask myself, as a person who needs to sell tickets to sustain this thing, because we don't work on grants or anything like that. We're not even a nonprofit. We just go for it. We're purely capitalistic or whatever you want to call it. But what would motivate somebody to go from their couch and have to get in a car and go downtown and into the city and do all of this nonsense? It's a lot of work. And then sit in a room of strangers and put on a blindfold and have emotions. It's because they want a state change of some kind. Liam's probably heard me say this before, as have you, Sojourn, but they want a state change. They want something that can take them farther or into new domain without great personal risk, perhaps. There's something that's worth it for that. And I say, great, I have a whole planet's worth of those little windows or portals you can, like, stick your head in and out, but then also have the experience of, like, what's going on down there? Who's going to be there to discuss and unpack this with me that is not just in the living room at my house or my room? Like, how can I interact with this in the real world? So there's like nuances. we put a red carpet down the center. We to sort of just give it that little bit of elevation. We've had times where we did the so-called egg carton where everything was separated, but it was too much separation. It was kind of like, what was the point of being here is what we found. So we put the things on a 45-degree angle so you could kind of peek over at the next person, but also have that sense of personal space, and a basket where you could put your purse and your keys. And we went into like 2-hour blocks because that's just enough before you get into too much cognitive load. But also it gives the pieces that are coming to the thing a sort of an elevation of like, yeah, look at this, instead of giving you a pound of spaghetti on a plate, it's that one perfect little chive covered morsel that you go, huh, I meant to consider this of its own, like it's got a dignity to it, and it should be viewed as such. And there's like all these kinds of iterations. Somebody said to me, you should do 5 hours like under a bridge around a bunch of burning barrels to really keep the spirit of what you're trying to do. And I never really forgot about that. I was like, should I? Is that the right way to do this thing? But I think it's and I'll get back to the train thing for in a second. But I thought, I don't know. I don't know if it's like gotta be like so cool and weird and edgy, because I'm trying to allow these experiences, which are wrought by great pains, to be the thing. Like, let them be the thing. Give them their moment. Allow them to have the space and the elevation of purpose to be viewed as the work of art that they are. So I don't shy away from the sort of the white cube kind of notion, but still, you can't just put it up on the walls. I mean, there's been many events where they just try to bring in chairs and VR headsets and think that they have a VR show, and it's really much, much more nuanced than that in many ways. All the friction has to be removed well in advance. It might seem a little fidgety at the time, but you've really done so much pre-work to prepare for, okay, if this collapses, then what's the fastest way to get the next person in? And whenever I talk to a group of students about how to submit to a festival, I say, make sure the thing starts well, make sure that the thing exits well, make sure that it has a fallback state if it crashes, make sure that it is not so long, because the long stuff is not going to get viewed, and any other proprietary or whatever things, then you better show up and run it yourself because you want it to be seen ultimately. So be clever, but you have to work to meet that event in order to make sure that this one-off experience is feasible to be seen by the few people who bother to drive down. So yeah, location is very much its own thing, and doing it in VR well is very much its own thing, and it should be studied, and it should be dignified, and it should not be taken for granted.
I would say my experience of working in virtual versus real spaces, I find this is more of a feeling than a thought, but virtual spaces, the tactics and the strategy and the energy, it just feels like it demands more. Maybe it's because we spent most of our key formative years working in meat space. Like, we know how to do that. We know how to lure people in or make them feel accommodating. Whereas virtual, maybe because we're new at it, it just feels like the distance is greater. We tend to see something we've had success in is not, for whatever reason, not marketing our immersive experiences as it's theater, nobody cares. It's an immersive theater. I know that scares me. I don't want to come. It's amazing. It's like nothing you've ever experienced before. It's an amazing experience. Oh, I'm coming. Take my money. Right. So that's something we learned because we were excited about theater, but not everyone's excited about theater. They're lost. So that's something we learned. Motivating attendees to come to our virtual events, our virtual conferences, our virtual productions. It just feels like we have to do what we do in meat space, but so much more. It just feels like 300% more energy is required. It has to be 300% more special. We have to put 300% more thought into it because there's a vernacular that we all have as human beings. I do believe that sometimes it does get lost that we are social animals and we want to gather, I think, and like relate, and we all know how to read body language and everything. So when you take all that away and we're all just avatars, you all of a sudden 80% of your communication toolkit is gone. So now you have to really figure out the minutia of luring people in and making them feel welcome and make them feel at home, because you can't take anything for granted. You can't just, you know, do that famous production, sorry, of Our Town, where you wait till the third act and it's all like everyone's wearing like t-shirts and pajamas and it's all drab, and then you smell bacon when the female lead remembers what it was like to be alive, and then the curtain opens up and it's like you're back, you know, you're back in the town and the costumes are real and the stove is real and it's cooking bacon and everyone's just like and like everyone who saw that production, I didn't see it, but like I've heard 30 different people who saw that production tell me the story of how magical it was, and like, good job, New York Theater, like huge fan. But in the VR space, we can't just reach for those tricks, right? Like, it's like, I got it. Bake some cinnamon buns over there. Perfect. Cinnamon buns. We got them. Like, we can't sort of reach for those techniques. So I just feel like there's just a lot more energy involved, I would say, just to get people to come and to make people, not only to get them there, but to make them feel special, to make them feel that they're there. Even though we're an organization obsessed with liveness, part of creating that sense of liveness is we need people to feel like they're here with us right now. And it's in real life, it's effortless. Like, you're in an alley, you're in New York, you're in Manhattan, you're in a water tower, there's a spy. You can tell she's a spy because she has a cigarette and you can't see her face. And like, everyone knows what that means. Whereas I find creating that immediate sense of place in VR is much, much more challenging. However, it's offset by the limitless possibilities. So anyway, that's my very brief thoughts on that. I hope it's enlightening.
I want to respond to that because I have a festival where people do live performance and they are competing with all other 64 pieces in the show. And so I've gotten an opportunity to meet many different performance troops, etc. And the thing I see that makes them successful is the liminal onboarding zone. When they first come in, how they're introduced to the space, to each other. The introverts who are not unpopular in the VR space have to suddenly say hello to random people, but there is that protection of some sort of avatar that you can have. And, you know, Ari Tar is really great at sort of coming out and saying hello to everybody and sort of dragging them in. And just all of those different groups are, and just being that preliminary adjustment space that happens before you kind of go into the show naturally. Whether it's like Rowan Wood doing liminal, or who has to work with Resonite, which is a platform that many people are not yet familiar with, or Jason Moore doing the meta movie, and you know, he's the talking dog and he's got that great voice and he welcomes you in and they sort of talk you through, like, learning from games and how intrinsic tutorials work versus explicit tutorials at the beginning can also be really useful. How can I immediately start to bring you in gently and teach you one mechanic at a time, while also already holding you in the space of the world and introducing you to its properties, its limits, its personas, who you represent in that, what you can and can't do. You know, like in games, it's players always, the first thing they want to find out is, how do I die? Can I die? Can I jump off of things? Can I jump on spikes? Like, what are the laws of this universe? And so just to say, like, when you're thinking about bringing people into virtual theater space, think about that immediate first, like, how am I simultaneously removing friction, orienting you, giving you the laws of the universe and its physics? What is my relationship to others in this space? To what degree of interaction do I have to participate? Can I simply be a fly on the wall? In fact, I loved in the meta movie how you could not be like a main character, but you could actually just be a drone that floats along and occasionally votes on outcomes. And I thought that was a spectacular sort of mid ground for, I don't really want to participate, but I also want to feel that I have agency here and I'm not just watching TV. So yeah, just that transitional entrance point is mission critical in my opinion, and how it's handled.
Yeah, if I may respond to that, a bit of a digression. Agreed on all accounts. What I'm searching for is our organizations and artists in a process where everything that you're talking about, Karam, along with something that's fundamental to immersive theater practice, which is all of that, but then onboarding the audience to the fact that that avatar that's talking to them, it is another person. and playing the sort of coffee, sure, black, can I pour it for you? Like that series of escalating offers that makes interactive theater, which is like the central tenet, somehow getting that started with all the things, with sort of the way that good video games onboard you. And I've seen some really good examples, but I've yet to see something that nailed both of them. I haven't seen it yet, but I mean, it's a new art form. But anyway, yeah, thank you.
The groundlings teach you, if anything, they teach you, what does the audience want? They want to tap the glass and watch the fish move.
Comment on the final comments that related to the friction, perhaps, of engaging with audiences. And I think that Leon raised a great point that I completely ignored when I was talking about curating in different spaces, which is the fact that it's not only about your ways of relating with it and your discoveries as the person who's putting out the show, but also, yeah, how do we engage the audience, which is the other maybe critical element. And I think that both of them also commented on how game design, for many reasons, has very subtle and powerful ways of onboarding, like, and a lot of the rules of the game are actually embedded in how the first levels are designed, and maybe a lot of the experience of games is also exploring variations on these rules. And I guess this is very inspiring in the sense of how we should deal with the friction of getting different people coming together and discovering a new medium, because the friction itself, and I think that small description of do you want coffee, black, etc., it's part of the play as well. It's part of the transitional moment where one world becomes another, to come back to the concept of magic circle as well, Sojam. And I also liked very much when Kieran mentioned before that there's something in the details of an exhibition or event design that makes the whole difference in how people are reacting to being there, whether if they are feeling at ease and letting themselves go in the experience, or kind of, I don't know, for some reason, not really surrendering fully, and maybe not surrendering, or this kind of game of seduction, for the lack of a better word, where you transition, where you cross the doorway. That's something also very exciting to explore with new media, because it's a transformation of the audience themselves, like, and perhaps, yeah, don't know where I'm going with this. Just a number of random responses to some great ideas that you both raised in the last few statements.
We've been doing it for 10 years, sometimes twice a year in different markets. And it is a much, much better show than it was the first time that we did it. So you learn over time. And 10 years is not like nothing in this space. Like that is enough to track massive changes, but some things stayed the same. People just kind of want to be left alone, but they also don't want to completely be on their own. They want to have some assistance, and we spend plenty of time with docents. Usually they're like doing their master's program in VR, and they're there to assist. And I say, why should you be an assistant at this show? Because the amount you will learn from attending to a person from any walk of life who's coming in to watch any of 65 pieces on demand across different media and different affordances and different techniques is so important to your ideation process. And how do you fund something, and how much, what are the priorities in that? So it's not designed to be this like mass marketed thing. It's designed to be a thought experiment on how to transition into a new form of media, and then see directly the results of that on the person face to face, not through a Google form, not through some sort of telemetry, but like what just happened, and what happened when it was the third thing that they did, and what were the patterns that we got. And then we take that back to the creators and we say, here's what happened with your piece. Here's what you think happened. And this is what actually happened. And the creators very often, as you well know, Sojong, are willing to go back and literally break their their final build apart and change it and update it based on that data. And so we're this kind of intermediary moment of the sort of the cauldron or the crucible, and everybody should be paying attention to its outputs. It's not incidental. It's not a final stage thing. Just like Liam understands, just like Gabriel, when you're doing a curation, when you're running a museum, you go, what are the things that we can glean from this and apply? And what are sort of non-entities that they're insignificant. Like the number of people that came is not the biggest problem. The fact that there was an update that broke all the Meta 3s, that's not the biggest problem. There's these other nuances to pay attention to. So whoever is watching this, I would just say, like, those are not nothing. Those are big, big deals to listen to and see over time what ultimately becomes the most important part of this thing that we're spending our time on and its effects.
I will just to comment on our interpretation of what Karim just so thoughtfully shared. We agree with that philosophy, and we believe that we're not only creating experience in the moment, but we're trying to create community, and we're trying to create relationships within the sector. Like, that's the primary driver. So that's what our end goal is. So however, if people show up and they have a great experience and they connect with each other into the work and they become inspired to sort of explore this sector, then we've succeeded. Like that's the goal. And that's how we dealing with it. I spent a lot of time in the hospitality industry paying for my schooling, and I would say to my staff, I ran a fine dining restaurant, I'd be like, we're not creating customers, we're creating like clients. We're creating an ongoing relationship. Why they come here isn't because they can get bottles of wine and delicious food anywhere. They come here because they want this experience and they want this relationship and they want to feel like this is their place. That's our job, is to make an environment that they feel is theirs, is of them, is celebratory of them, and they have a stake in. That's your job. We're not in the sales business. We're in the community building business. And I feel like that's very true with this. But yeah, there's so much to talk about, but we can't talk all day. So that's it for me. So John, thank you.